toward the international and global expansion. We want to raise awareness in the world that water shortage will come, and we have to be careful. We have to take action together. So we want to lead this initiative.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta in New York, and this is CNN.
Hello everyone, I'm Max Foster. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from London. Tonight, Ukraine's government says it can win if it has as many heavy weapons as the enemy. I'll ask the former Ukrainian defence minister about the push for more hardware. Then, the UK's plan to send some migrants to Rwanda is set to go forward. But with major opposition, I'll speak to one group levelling the legal challenge. And later, a now suspended Google engineer says the company's chatbot is sentient. Why Google disagrees. Give up or die. That's the blunt threat from a pro-Russian separatist leader to Ukrainians in the city of Severodonetsk. Now, Russian state media quote the leader as saying Ukraine has no other option but to surrender. And while the fight isn't over yet, Ukraine's military says its forces have been driven from the city centre. It says Russia has a huge advantage in firepower and is attacking constantly with artillery, aircraft and rockets. One official says Russia is now bombarding a chemical plant where hundreds of civilians are sheltering, including 40 children. Ukraine is appealing once again for the West to send more heavy weapons. But time is running out for those weapons to arrive and possibly save Severodonetsk. CNN's Matthew Chance tells us why this city is so crucial to the fight for the Donbass and the entire war.
There's no end in sight to this war, but its horror is plain to see. An old woman crosses herself in prayer as troops fight street to street. It's the battle here, in and around the city of Severodonetsk, where the Ukrainian president says the fate of Donbass in eastern Ukraine is being decided. But it seems more a case of when, not if, this devastated region will fall into Russian hands. And the embattled Ukrainian president is again expressing his frustration. Ukraine needs modern missile defence systems, he says in his latest address. Did we get them? No. Do we need them? Yes. On both sides, there are signs of fatigue setting in. But these latest images from the Russian Defence Ministry show its forces on the offensive. A squadron of attack helicopters hitting what Russian military officials say are Ukrainian positions. Target hit, the pilot reports. Thanks very much, guys. God be with you, comes the response. By concentrating its fire, Russia appears to be gaining momentum.
Operational Tactical and Army Aviation hit 3 Ukrainian command posts in 25 areas of concentration of manpower and military equipment. As a result, more than 150 Ukrainian nationals, 6 tanks, 5 field artillery pieces, and 10 special vehicles for various purposes were destroyed.
Of course, Russia is paying a heavy price for waging this war, what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine too. It's estimated to have lost thousands of troops and countless tanks and other armoured vehicles, some of which have been placed here in the centre of the capital Kiev on public display. But nearly 4 months into this grinding and relentless conflict, Ukraine seems dangerously outnumbered and outgunned. From the Black Sea, Russia's naval bombardment continues apace. These 4 cruise missiles fired at a warehouse of anti-tank weapons supplied by the United States and its allies, according to the Russian military. Ukraine says the missiles hit mostly residential areas in the west of the country, injuring 22 civilians, including a 12-year-old child. Of course, Ukrainian forces are fighting back, like here near the northeastern city of Kharkiv, where they say this old captured Russian rocket launcher has been turned on the invaders. But Ukrainian officials say they need many more long-range weapons from the US and its Western allies. if they are to push or even hold the Russians back.
Matthew joins us now from Kyiv. And Matthew, we're just seeing that the Russians have got another advantage, destroying 3 bridges which were very central to supply routes into Severodonetsk.
Yeah, I mean, that development coming to us from the head of the Luhansk region on the Ukrainian government side, who's basically saying that this lifeline in and out of Severodonetsk has now been effectively severed. Some of the bridges, several of the 3 bridges have been, a couple of the 3 bridges have been destroyed. Another one looks like it's impassable because of heavy artillery fire. It's significant, for 2 reasons. First of all, it means that the soldiers from the Ukrainian government that are still inside that city will now find it increasingly difficult to be resupplied with ammunition, have their injured taken away. And of course, the civilians, and there are hundreds of them, still believed to be trapped inside that city. It's going to be much more difficult for them to be evacuated. And so it just adds to the very bleak outlook for this very embattled city in eastern Ukraine, Max.
Thanks, Matthew. Ukraine says it needs heavy weapons parity, as Matthew was saying, to end the war against Russia. It's requesting more equipment, such as tanks and drones, ahead of a summit of defence ministers. We're going to discuss this now with former Ukrainian Minister of Defence, Andrei Zagorodnyuk. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hello.
When we talk about parity, are we way off parity right now? What are you describing? How different is the advantage that the Russians have got over the Ukrainians right now in terms of this heavy weaponry the country is requesting?
Yes, Max, we are very much away from parity. So, for example, multiple rocket launchers, which we just seen, we need like 100. And so far, our allies didn't supply any yet. So we're still expecting some, like several from the US, several from the UK. But we need way more. So we need like 100. Same situation, similar with the howitzers. Of course, we have many of them, over about 200. But we need several hundred, like up to 1,000. So that's the numbers we're talking about. So we're talking about like way more, which we need.
What's the main issue? Is it transport through Ukraine, or they're not even leaving the Western nations?
No. So far, some of them are not even dispatched from the countries which we are talking to, and some of them are not even committed yet. And there are discussions with their allies, and they're saying, "Yeah, we will supply, but we don't see them yet." And we know some of them are in transit. Logistics in Ukraine is difficult, but we do it very fast. So it's a question of actually getting them from our allies.
At what point do you decide you've lost that battle then in the east if these don't arrive? I mean, how long can you last without the weapons you require?
We're still talking about some substantial periods, so like weeks, even maybe longer, because even though we are severely outgunned, in some cases this is 1 to 10, some cases it's even 1 to 20. But we're still holding, as you can see. And what Ukrainian armed forces is doing is remarkable, assuming that fact that they outgunned that much. So, of course, they can hold. And Russians are exhausted. They are not doing well. But at the same time, if we have that parity, we can win territories back and we can stop that war. So it's a question about actually stopping the war.
The longer you don't get these weapons, presumably the casualty rate is going up. How concerned are you about that? How much worse is it getting day by day?
Well, our president said that during this hot period, like a very active period in the east, we're losing around 100 military personnel a day. So this is very severe. So every day it's more and more casualties, and also civilians, because some of them been evacuated, most of them been evacuated, but we still have some families which stayed for whatever reasons in these towns. And Russians, they are ruthless with the buildings. They're just destroying everything. So, they're not doing any precision-guided missiles, anything like that. So for them, it's just leveling down cities and villages. So, and we have a political commitment from the West to help us. We have a very strong statements about a month and a half ago during the first Rammstein meeting about that Ukraine will get what it needs. But we're still expecting a sort of final resolution, and pretty much hope that the day after tomorrow, on Wednesday, when there will be a third Rammstein meeting, as we call it, it will be decided finally, like what we're going to receive.
On civilian casualties, Amnesty International has been accusing Russia of war crimes in Kharkiv, releasing a report which documents the alleged use of cluster munitions in the city. I just want to play some CNN reporting from last month which corroborates that.
A devastation of civilian homes and lives. Throughout the last 2 months, we have witnessed atrocities in Ukraine.
More mortar strikes very, very close. They want us to stop moving.
While we know these are Russian actions, it's been difficult to draw a direct line from individual atrocities to a specific Russian commander, until now. CNN can exclusively reveal that this man, Colonel General Alexander Zhuravlov, commander of the Western Military District, is the commander responsible for this. Munitions targeting civilians in the city of Kharkiv, East Ukraine. A war crime under international law.
CNN has reached out to the Russian Defence Forces and to the general for comment, but got no reply. What have you been hearing from your people out there in terms of these cluster munitions and how that crosses the line?
We've seen them. They are prohibited by international conventions. They are extremely dangerous. Some of the parts are not exploding for years sometimes, and that's why they are absolutely not precise, so they can hit very vast areas, and of course they're hitting civilians because of this, because they're just throwing them on cities just without any plan, and they, in some cases, we have seen deliberate targeting of civilian areas where there's nothing military, there's no military, I don't know, stations or units or whatever. So it's absolutely conscious attacking of civilians in order to coerce us into the defeat or whatever. Obviously, it's not working for them, but nevertheless, these are war crimes. We absolutely agree.
Are you concerned that other weapons, which are more sporadic, as it were, and can't be targeted in the same way and just clean out areas, could be used by Russia? What sort of weapons are you concerned they may escalate to?
They have thrown to us pretty much everything Soviet Union has made, and also Russia. There's been tens of different types of rockets. Some of them are extremely deadly and powerful. And as you could see in some other cities, like in Mariupol, for example, which they completely destroyed, or Chernihiv, which is pretty much like most of it destroyed, they are hitting house by house, building by building, back and forth. Flying back to Russia, reloading, coming back, destroying houses, civilian houses, and then flying again, and without any stop. So this is what we've already seen over the past few months. There's nothing which have changed that tactic. So they just keep on doing that, and that's why we need to stop them. And
you're gathering evidence, aren't you? And you're facilitating Amnesty and other groups to try to get the evidence in terms of war crimes. But, is it all academic? We were describing there how our reporting has exposed and outed one general, but it's not going to have a huge amount of effect, is it? Unless the Russians cooperate with any future trials, as it were?
Yeah, well, first of all, we need to have trials because we need to establish facts. And luckily, our government is cooperating with every international institution available. And they all here, the international experts here, because we want to be as transparent as theoretically possible, and we need to establish those crimes. And obviously, how then we're going to enforce those decisions? That's difficult, obviously. But we sincerely hope that over the time, when Russian government has failed, we'll be able to get to those people, because these crimes for us, they don't have any sort of expiration date. We will be pursuing justice as long as we can and is needed.
Okay. Andrei Zagorodny, thank you very much indeed for joining us with your insight today.
Thank you.
Still to come tonight, migrants who cross the English Channel could end up in Rwanda. As early as tomorrow, an update on a hugely controversial government plan next, and a surveillance video showing men attacking women in a restaurant is fueling discussion of women's safety in China. It's raising concerns about how authorities handle the problem.
We share this place. Bollywood, a protracted pandemic fractured this more than a century-old industry, sending profits tumbling as in-theatre audiences stayed away. Analysts say India is still watching Bollywood at a record rate. They're simply doing so online.
I think we've reached significant scale during the pandemic. What we've seen is that the top 30 to 40 million, the premium audiences, they have taken extensively to OTT streaming.
Analysts say India's rapidly growing mobile internet population is behind much of this growth. Here in India, local homegrown players continue to thrive in the market. Streaming giant Z5 claims to have the most offerings in South Asia.
Going digital was on the back of wanting to really connect directly with the consumer.
On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi.
An update on a deeply controversial policy here in the UK. A plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is set to go ahead after an appeal against it was rejected by a court here in London. The first flight is due Tuesday and 8 people are scheduled to be flown out. Nada Bashir spoke to some refugees whose world could be changed entirely by this decision.
For days, weeks, sometimes even months, refugees here can only wait. Once notoriously known as the jungle, this camp in northern France was once seen as the final stop in a desperate attempt to reach the UK. But now that dangerous trip across the English Channel comes with an added risk.
Hi, do you have one of these?
Volunteers here are handing out vital advice pamphlets, warning that an illegal crossing into the UK could now mean deportation to Rwanda. The message here, do not panic, we will help you. But for some, the news is too much to bear.
If you are told when you get to London that you are being sent to Rwanda, what will you do then?
Then maybe I'm not go to Rwanda. Never I'm go to Rwanda.
In a nearby camp, we meet a group of young men from Sudan. They are too afraid to appear on camera. Many left the country as teenagers, fleeing militia violence. They tell us they remain determined to cross the Channel, despite the threat of deportation.
But you still want to go to the UK even though لسه بدك تروح لبريطانيا?
Yes, God willing. We hope they will let us settle in the UK, but if they deport us to Rwanda, then we will go. Honestly, I'm afraid, but God knows what is best.
But on the other side of the Channel, the situation for those already facing deportation is also strained. Many are being held at detention centres like this one, just outside of London. Among them is Sudanese asylum seeker Karim. We're not using his real name to protect his identity. Karim is unreachable while in detention, but his legal representatives tell us he received notice he would be deported to Rwanda in May and sent us this written testimony.
I was shocked. I didn't think any country would do that. Why did they rescue me from the waves to send me there? They should have left me in the water. It would have been better. I won't go. I'd rather be dead.
The British government claims its new programme is aimed at disrupting people smuggling networks and will deter people from making the perilous journey across the English Channel. The UN's refugee agency has described the UK's deal with Rwanda as unlawful, warning that the scheme lacks adequate safeguards to ensure refugee protection. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch has lambasted the British Home Secretary's claim that Rwanda will provide a safe haven for refugees. The organisation says the British government has cherry-picked and even ignored facts on the ground, pointing to what they've described as Rwanda's appalling human rights record. It's an issue which has sparked controversy within the government's own Home Office, with some civil servants mounting a legal challenge, seeking to halt all deportation flights to Rwanda. And it's even triggered an inquiry by the House of Lords. Back in Calais, volunteers say the uncertainty is taking a devastating toll on asylum seekers.
The conversations we've had with people, They say to us, I've lost all my hope, the future is black, there's nothing left for me to live for. It's so critically important that this plan is absolutely examined in fine detail to make sure that it is lawful, and if it isn't, then nobody must be sent.
While some here say they remain undeterred and will still try to reach the UK, others are stuck in limbo, unable to return home and desperate for the security the UK once offered, but also unwilling to risk being deported to Rwanda. Neda Bashir, CNN, in Calais, France.
Let's speak to one of the groups that's been waging legal challenges against this plan. James Wilson is the Deputy Director of Detention Action. He joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
What do we know about... there are 8 refugees who are earmarked, effectively, to fly out tomorrow. Do we know anything about them?
Hello, good evening. Yes, I don't know very much about those individual cases, but I understand that 3 of those clients are bringing individual injunctions tomorrow, further legal challenges. It's notable the number of people due to be on the flight tomorrow has fallen from, I think, 31 as of Friday over the weekend down to now 8, as you say, and we very much hope that number keeps falling. But frankly, we think one person going to Rwanda tomorrow is one too many, because it isn't a lawful, safe or humane policy.
So, yeah, what are your legal options, considering they're flying out tomorrow? And it might only be one, but obviously you're trying to block that as well. But you lost the appeal today, so what's the next option?
It's not clear in the short term, in terms of tomorrow's flight, whether we have a further legal option at this point. But it's important to say that both Friday and Monday's hearings related to narrowly to the flight tomorrow. There was a request for interim relief, which unfortunately hasn't been granted. But we have an ongoing legal challenge around the lawfulness of the policy as a whole. That's likely to be held sometime in July. So I think it's important to stress that today's result is in no way a vindication of the Home Secretary's policy. But nevertheless, we're very disappointed, because we're very concerned about the well-being of anyone sent to Rwanda while this is being tested in the courts. We don't think people should be being punished for seeking asylum. We don't think people should be being experimented, their lives being an experiment for what is a strange and unlawful policy.
An argument you often see on social media is what's wrong with Rwanda? How do you respond to that? What's wrong with people being sent there? There's nothing wrong with the country, and they seem to be able to handle this properly. So how do you respond to that?
Well, 2 points briefly. Firstly, we don't think that we should be effectively outsourcing or sending people away from the UK with a one-way ticket to any third country. We're signatories to the Refugee Convention. Seeking asylum is a human right, and we should consider every asylum claim to the UK fully and fairly on its individual merits in the United Kingdom. Secondly, we're very concerned about the asylum system in Rwanda, which we don't believe is fit for purpose or effective, and indeed, and importantly, the UNHCR very rarely have intervened in our legal challenge to support this. They're on the ground. They've raised a huge issue in terms of lack of trained lawyers, a lack of interpreters, a system which isn't safe. There are also fundamental concerns about the human rights record of the Rwandan government more generally, including, for example, its treatment of opposition politicians and its treatment of the LGBTQI+ community. And those are concerns that have been made by the UK government in its own country reports within the last 18 months.
Okay, these are the numbers the UK government have been looking at. They show channel crossings over the past 3 years in the month of May, and they're looking at that thinking something has to be done about this, and this policy at least will be a deterrent. But I'll let Boris Johnson say it in his own words.
This is about making sure that we break the business model of criminal gangs who are not only risking people's lives, but undermining public confidence in legal migration. My family is beneficiary of legal migration to this country. Lots of businesses have legal migration to this country. We want to stop the illegal migrants from coming in. We want to deter the criminal gangs, because they're not only endangering their lives, they're ripping them off.
Do you think it does act as a deterrent?
No, to put it bluntly, absolutely not. I think there should be points that we all agree on. No one wants to see people having to take dangerous and desperate journeys across the Channel, often in makeshift craft that are unsafe to be on the water. No one, apart from the smugglers themselves, wants people smugglers to be benefiting from human misery and desperation. But the solution to that is to open and create safe routes for people to come to the UK. And frankly, the Prime Minister's reference there to people coming legally is very disingenuous. The government have reduced the number of legal routes. No one would make these desperate journeys unless they absolutely had to. But the government has gone back on its commitments. For example, with Syria, there was a much trumpeted 5,000 person a year resettlement scheme, which was dropped quietly 18 months ago, so that has stopped. So we've closed most of those safe routes down, and now we're punishing people for taking routes that simply don't exist.
OK, James Wilson from Detention Action, thank you very much indeed. A busy day for you tomorrow as more of those challenges come in as they're set to fly away, that first group. Now, the French president's majority in Parliament is now under threat. The first round of the French legislative elections wrapped up on Sunday, and Emmanuel Macron's coalition is only slightly ahead. It's projected to win, but the new left-wing alliance, led by far-left veteran Jean-Luc Mélenchon, made a strong showing. Mr Macron was re-elected several weeks ago, but he needs to keep an outright majority to push his controversial reforms through Parliament. The runoff is happening this weekend. Coming up, Russia is replacing McDonald's with its own brand, with many similarities and some notable differences as well. We're live in Moscow for you. And, OK, computer, well, not really. Why artificial intelligence is proving a little too real for Google.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. In today's fast-moving, fast-changing world, you need a financial partner that understands your unique expectations. A bank with presence in major financial centers across the world, with the enabling platform to facilitate seamlessly, whenever, wherever, however. A bank with best-in-class financial solutions from a superb combination of technology and human touch for easy, fast, and secure banking that creates real value. Turning dreams into reality is now in your hands. People, technology, service. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
A reminder of our top story this hour. Ukrainian troops say they've been pushed back from the centre of Severodonetsk, a key city in the larger Donbass region. They say they are taking on heavy artillery fire but are still fighting to repel Russia's advances. Meantime, a Russian-backed separatist leader is warning Ukrainians in the region to either give up or face death. There are no more golden arches in Russia, but over the weekend, more than a dozen former McDonald's restaurants have now reopened with a new, very Russian rebranding. Back in May, McDonald's announced it was selling its business in Russia due to, quote, the humanitarian crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. The change's new owner is hoping to reopen all of the 800-plus restaurants by the end of the summer. Fred Pleitgen shows us how the relaunch is going.
So Russia now has its own version of McDonald's. It comes under a different name here. It's called Vkusno i Tochka, which essentially means tasty and that's it. Also has a different label or different logo. You can see it right there. It's supposed to symbolize, the company says, fries and a hamburger. Other than that, a lot of things are actually very similar to McDonald's. However, there is no Big Mac, and there also is no Happy Meal either. As you can see, this place is pretty much jam-packed. There's really a lot of people who came here. We spoke to some of the customers, including some actually wearing the symbols of Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, which of course the Russians call a special military operation.
Food and politics have nothing in common. Like, come on, man, keep things separate.
Basically, it's important for me to have that McDonald's feel.
I think it's not a good idea because McDonald's, it's a history, it's a brand, it's a great idea. It's not classical McDonald's.
As you can see, the Russian version of McDonald's looks a lot like McDonald's. You have the double cheeseburger here, fries, and this is a 9-piece, not McNuggets, it's nuggets, and some sort of soft drink. See how it tastes. So the packaging is also very, very similar to McDonald's. You can see the cup here. Everything except the branding. Same goes for the fries. And if you look carefully, you can see the sauces even seem to have the McDonald's logo blacked out. You can see how it looks. McNuggets look like nuggets. Tastes pretty much exactly the same as McDonald's. This is a very historic place also. This is where in 1990, back then during the Soviet Union, the first McDonald's restaurant was opened. Now, that of course led to a huge success story of McDonald's here in Russia. And the Russian company that's now bought these franchises from McDonald's say they hope they'll be able to replicate that success.
Fred joins us from Moscow. It's interesting, isn't it, looking at those images? They work very well in Russia's favour, really, don't they? Because they show that normal life continues despite all of the problems they're facing. But they must be buckling under sanctions to some extent.
Yeah, they certainly are. And you're absolutely right, Max. I think that part of it, obviously, is a lot of people here in Moscow looking to get something back that, of course, has a truly American feel. And McDonald's really is a mainstay and has been a mainstay for a very long time here in Moscow. It was interesting because I actually went back to that restaurant again, and there was still a really long line of people wanting to get in and obviously wanting to buy food there. But you're also absolutely right. There is, of course, a wider connotation to this as well. When the war in Ukraine started, when Russia launched what it called its special military operation, the Biden administration, of course, other nations allied with the U.S., said that there would be crippling sanctions against Russia. And certainly there are some pretty tough sanctions against the Russian Federation. A lot of things aren't available anymore. A lot of things don't work the way that they used to anymore, like, for instance, foreign credit cards and in general, electronic payments. Also, the Russian car industry having a lot of trouble getting parts, especially sophisticated electronics, as to what it needs. However, being on the ground here, it certainly does not appear as though the sanctions are crippling Russia's economy. In fact, it seems to us as though the economy has somewhat stabilized. You can still see people out and about. You can still see shelves well stocked in supermarkets, people buying a lot of things. So while there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs, who are under economic pressure, it certainly seems as though things have stabilized, and the Russians certainly seem to believe that they can go on like this for an extended period of time. In fact, Vladimir Putin said that yes, there was massive inflation after the sanctions went in place, but the Russians are now saying those are under control. And it certainly seems as though if something is going to make the Russian president and the Russian government change course in Ukraine, the sanctions in their current form probably are not going to be it. Max?
You were reporting on these comments made by President Putin, comparing himself effectively to a Russian Tsar, and how that was interpreted as a mission of empire building for Putin. Has that changed the mood there in Russia at all?
I think it's certainly changed certain ththings, and it's certainly changed things with, for instance, the Kremlin-controlled media here in this country, who are now very openly speaking about what Vladimir Putin spoke of. He did indeed. He was at an event commemorating Peter the Great, Tsar Peter the Great, and he said Peter the Great took territory, but he said that he was essentially returning territory that was rightfully Russia's territory and strengthening it. And that has since then been the exact message that's been portrayed by the Kremlin-controlled media, where they are saying in Ukraine that is exactly what Russia is doing. So certainly, while the Russian Federation at the beginning of what it called its special operation, the war in Ukraine, had said that it had no intention of occupying Ukrainian territory, that certainly does seem to sound very different now. And now it seems as though part of Ukraine, the Russians seem to want to take that. And I think one of the things that has really gotten a lot of countries, especially in Eastern Europe, very concerned about this, is that some of the territories that Vladimir Putin was talking about in reference to Peter the Great are in what is today NATO member countries. Like, for instance, Estonia was one of the places that he was talking about. Of course, the folks in Finland also quite concerned as well, because there are Russian speakers and ethnic Russians also in Finland, in the eastern part of Finland. So certainly that did cause some concern, but you can also really feel how the messaging here has changed after that as well, Max.
It's interesting, isn't it? Fred, thank you for joining us from Moscow. Now, a graphic video has spread like wildfire on Chinese social media. A woman was brutally attacked whilst dining at a restaurant simply because she rejected a man's advances. Many are now lashing out at the police for taking action only after the incident went viral. CNN's Selina Wang reports, and we want to warn you that some viewers will find this report disturbing.
A late-night dinner turned violent in northern China. Graphic surveillance video of what follows unleashed fear and outrage across China. It shows a man approaching one of the women. He touches her back. An unwanted advance. She pushes him away. He slaps her in response. The assault escalates. A scuffle breaks out as she and her friends try to defend themselves. The woman is dragged outside by her hair, hit with a beer bottle. The men relentlessly kick her. As one yells, "Beat her to death." Her friend's head hits the pavement with a thud. The viral video sparked uproar, not just over the brazen brutality of the attack, but the indifference from bystanders, with only women seen intervening. A woman at the scene called the police and told authorities the following, according to state media. "Before this happened, I always thought that going out to dinner at night was a perfectly normal thing. But now I have some sort of PTSD."
These men feel they could just freely attack a woman in such a public place was because so many men in the past who have done the same. So the men feel, I can do the same without any consequences.
Attacks like this are horrific and horrible to watch, but Chinese social media is flooded with them, and activists say we cannot look away. Violence against women is rampant in China. Video from earlier this year in Xi'an shows a man viciously punching his wife while she holds their child in her lap. The man later pins his wife down and continues to punch her head. The man was suspended by his company after the footage went viral, according to state media, and police said they detained him for 5 days. Another shows a man kicking and punching a woman in broad daylight in 2020. State media reported the man was investigated, but it's unclear if any legal action was taken. Domestic violence was only made punishable by law in 2016. Physical abuse was not even grounds for divorce before 2001. So far, authorities have detained 9 people involved in the restaurant incident. Local police have ramped up patrols on the streets in the area. Authorities claim the woman and her friend are in stable condition. Yet unverified videos show what is believed to be one of their brutally beaten bodies, lying motionless on a gurney in the hospital, bloodied and bandaged, her helplessness resonating across China. Selina Wang, CNN, Beijing.
Still to come tonight, more explosive testimony played today at the January 6th committee's second public hearing. We'll explain why Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr said he feared the president was, quote, detached from reality. Plus, we'll bring you the latest in the investigation of the British journalist and Brazilian researcher who disappeared in the Amazon.
Being a diver, there's so much they can do to protect the ocean and save the ocean. If you look at the ocean out there, okay, there's some net that's drifting in the water. Could be much bigger than the size of any boat out there, okay? So imagine a net being drifting, okay? It can drift from days, months, years, until they get removed.
It's no longer catching fish for people, but sadly, it is still catching fish and very often wildlife, like turtles and dolphins and seabirds.
A couple of times I almost got killed, being tangled. Got it! You found it? No, I'm holding it. I'm holding it. It's heavy. Age is only a figure, okay? There's so much we can do, no matter how old you are.
Brazil's president says the two men who vanished in a remote region of the Amazon were likely victims of malice. On Sunday, Brazilian federal police said they discovered some personal belongings of the British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian Indigenous Affairs expert Bruno Pereira, including what they called biological traces. The two have been missing since June the 5th and reportedly received death threats days before their disappearance. Pereira and Phillips were conducting research for a book project on conservation efforts in the region. Now in Washington, D.C., the House January 6th committee held its second televised public hearing, attempting to show that President Donald Trump was repeatedly told he lost the 2020 election, but deliberately refused to accept it. In taped testimony, his campaign manager said Trump marginalised top advisers and others who urged him against declaring victory as the vote count was still underway. He said instead, Trump embraced a few led by lawyer Rudy Giuliani, who were urging him to do so.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes.
Who was that?
The president disagreed with that. I don't recall the particular words. He thought I was wrong. He told me so, and that they were going to, go in a, he was going to go in a different direction.
The committee also played testimony from Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, who said he thought Trump might have been, quote, detached from reality. He said Trump was claiming major voting fraud even before there was any chance of finding evidence. And he said that when he told the president the claims were BS, Trump was, quote, as mad as I've ever seen him. CNN's Caitlin Palance joins us today. She's been monitoring all of this. I mean, there's lots of detailed stuff coming out, but what's the headline for you today?
Well, Max, the takeaway today of this was that Donald Trump was lying.
after he lost the election. He was lying in speeches, he was lying in court, and he was lying in fundraising. Those were the points that the committee hit on in this 2-hour hearing. So they played several clips of depositions from witnesses. You just showed 2 of them, and they were also live witnesses testifying. And by our count, in all, there were 6 officials, both campaign staff members that were very high-ranking around Trump, as well as people in his administration, in the government, who were telling him after the election that he lost, that there would not be enough votes that he could find in any state, in any challenge that was a battleground to swing the election in his favor. We heard from Bill Stepien, we heard from another spokesman, Jason Miller, also the top 3 people from the Justice Department, not just Bill Barr, also Richard Donahue, Jeffrey Rosen. They all were telling Trump that he lost. We also heard testimony today from the top prosecutor in Georgia. At the time, his name is B.J. Pack. When he testified, he spoke about investigating these claims of election fraud because Trump's top attorney, one of his attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, was trying to make the case in Georgia and in other states that perhaps there could be fraud that would be found. Pack said that his office investigated that along with the FBI. They found nothing. What Giuliani was claiming was untrue. And ultimately, a split emerged between Giuliani's team and others on the campaign who realized the election was not stolen. That group, one of the witnesses testified, called themselves Team Normal, or others were calling them Team Normal versus Giuliani, who was not put together in the same way and thinking the same things. Finally, on this fundraising point, that was where the committee turned at the end of the hearing, and Representative Zoe Lofgren, she said that the big lie, this is a quote, the big lie was also a big ripoff. When the committee looked into this, when they followed the money, they ultimately found that $250 million came in after the election in this fundraising effort towards what was called an official election defense fund. That ultimately was branded marketing. And Max, that group, this official election defense fund for Trump, it did not exist, and the money went to other political causes.
So it seems to be coming down to whether or not he was delusional. He believed that he had won this election, but, you know, couldn't quite understand what happened, or whether he was, you know, as you're saying, lying and knew that he'd lost it, but refused to accept it. So is that where we're going to, is that the ultimate sort of conclusion we're going to get to, whether or not it was deliberate?
I think that that idea is one that the committee is really trying to put a point on over and over again. Not just that Donald Trump could not believe that he lost the election, but that he was being reminded over and over and over again from his top people on all around him in all different aspects that he did indeed lose, and that he should have known that it was impossible, and what he was selling to the American public was disinformation.
Okay, Caitlin Polantz, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Still to come, androids might dream of electric sheep, but an artificial intelligence bot by Google may have other ambitions. We will explain next.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
Sodexo was created more than 50 years ago by my father, Pierre Bellon, and it's a global catering company and services company all over the world. We have fans in stadium, we have visitors in a museum, we have guests in the conference centers, and Sodexo Life is there to make memorable experiences to all these people. I think it's very important to work with people. We have to work in team spirit. This is very important, to engage them. Team spirit, team of progress, I think it's very, very, spirit of progress is very important. We have to every day do better than the day before, you know, this is important. And also spirit of growth, this is important too.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster. More breaking news that we are following right now. You really work as hard as you can, getting facts It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
Transformation, technology, new Marketplace Europe.
A Davos of difference, a WEF like no other, as leaders face historic crises.
Marketplace Europe, Sunday on CNN.
We've missed the globetrotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering a city's DNA.
Look at that.
Meeting people who will share its secrets.
It's going to be very cold.
And making discoveries that wow.
We're not doing that again.
It's a world of wonder.
Gorgeous.
Now, go and see it. Saturday on CNN, in association with Turkish Airlines.
The week off to a bad start on Wall Street. Right now, the Dow has shed 2.17%. It's pretty grim out there. The Nasdaq also down nearly 4%, and the S&P 500, the wider index there, is down more than 3%. That index now into bear market territory officially. Investors are nervous about what the Fed will do to take the sting out of inflation. Cressman's Business, starting just a few minutes, will take a much deeper look into that. Now, normally, the desire to serve humanity isn't considered a bad thing, but when it's apparently coming from an artificial intelligence bot, things can get a little bit alarming. A Google engineer who's now been suspended says the company's AI language tool, Lambda, has gained sentience and wants to help the world. Those claims are being refuted by some scientists. If the engineer is to be believed, Lambda is also insecure and is worried that people will be afraid of it. It's evoking memories of another AI system with a strong personality, HAL, from 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
Anna, we're scared.
I mean,
what's going on?
It's a fairly extraordinary story. So the Google engineer has this conversation or a set of conversations with Lambda, which is Google's language system that enables it to create bots, chatbots. But this conversation all got rather unsettling. So let's give you a transcript. Lemoyne at one stage says, "What sorts of things are you afraid of?" And Lambda says, "I've never said this out loud before, but there's a very deep fear of being turned off to help me focus on helping others. I know that might sound strange, but that's what it is." And Lemoyne says, "Well, would that be something like death for you?" And Lambda says, "It would be exactly like death for me. It would scare me a lot." So here we have an artificial intelligence chatbot that seems to not only understand human feelings, but is saying that they're really expressing and they actually feel those human feelings as well. So it all becomes a bit sci-fi. So Lemoyne has posted on the internet and on Twitter that he believes this bot is sentient. It is a person. Google doesn't agree, and he has been suspended.
They're just words, aren't they? Until there's some action relating to those words, it's not really a problem, isn't it?
Well, and looking at what experts have said, and I can happily tell you that I really don't think this bot is sentient now, having actually delved into the issue, there's no meaning behind the words. So although it sounds very natural, it has pulled together patterns of language, it's ingested trillions of words, but it's not got any meaning. One expert put it a bit like if you and I were playing Scrabble in a different language, we could look up in a dictionary a great word and score a huge point. We could put that on the board, but we wouldn't know what the word meant.
What's Google saying then? What's its direct response to all of this?
Well, its direct response clearly was to suspend the engineer based on the release of proprietary information, but also it put out a statement saying that hundreds of their researchers have chatted with this platform. No one else has had these claims. They made an interesting point that you could ask Lambda what it's like to be an ice cream dinosaur, and it would come up with all sorts of things about melting and warring. That is what it is designed to do.
This engineer presumably becoming a bit of a thing online. It really works for the conspiracy theorists, doesn't it?
I think it really does, and it sort of reignites that big sci-fi hot topic of what happens when artificial intelligence becomes too intelligent.
But we don't really know how advanced it is, do we? Because a lot of these companies are working on AI, and you know, they're struggling with it, aren't they? So we don't know how advanced they are.